Welcome to the We Are Libertarians book club. This is our second one. We've got Paul Copeland, we've got Hadley, we've got Jacob. How are you guys all doing today?
Doing great.
All right.
All good.
Sweet. Well, I am Hody, and there's no real host on this one, so free form if you guys want to ask any questions. I'll just get us kicked off here. We read The Libertarian Mind by David Bowes. I cannot stand the way he spells his last name because it's spelled Boaz, the same as the guy in the Bible, Boaz, but apparently insists on it being pronounced Bowes. So I'm not going to contest him on that. He wrote a whole book, so I guess he can pronounce his name the way he'd like to pronounce it. He is the executive vice president for the Cato Institute and wrote this book, and it is actually an extension. I guess the first version, Chris is actually out sick today, but he told me that it was originally called the Libertarian, I guess, primer, and it was just kind of an introduction to it, and then he added more to it about surveillance and welfare and things like that, and so the full book now is called The Libertarian Mind. And so let's just go around the room. Let's get now Paul has already admitted that he didn't read the book, but he's here for the delightful conversation, and I'm glad he's here. But let's go around the room and just give us some of your initial thoughts. Hadley, why don't you start?
Thanks. I think it was a great introductory book to libertarianism. I'm very new. I'm a newbie here. So I think a lot of it as you're reading through is like, yeah, this makes complete sense. I think everybody thinks the same way. But we've just been raised in a different culture and a different mindset. But I think it was really great because it starts to give you a elementary level of, okay, what is libertarianism? And not getting too deep and far down into it, and it's a pretty easy read, which was kind of nice too. And I do admit I'd made a mention that I thought I still had like half the book to go, but I didn't realize that the last quarter was all notes. So I'm reading. I got a Kindle for the book club, so I couldn't actually see how much I had left, but I tried to rush through the last of it. And I said I'm listening to Audible so I can get a little bit more knowledge out of it. But I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. And would probably recommend it to anybody that is new and looking to learn more about the Libertarian Mind.
Yeah. Jacob, what are your feelings on it?
No, kind of the same thing that was already said about it being a good book that talks about the basics. I thought it was a good book to have early on in the book club just to get some shared understanding going forward. For the books we're going to read that maybe will be a little bit more complex. At least now we have like a shared understanding, a shared starting point on this is what the basics we're trying to get at. Everything else I'll say for the rest of the conversation coming up.
Okay, great. For me, I think that mere Christianity is to Christianity as the Libertarian Mind is to libertarianism. I think that because mere Christianity is intended for people who are not Christians. It's funny because the book and a lot of Christians tend to like it, but it's intended for people who have problems or questions or concerns about Christianity. And that's what C.S. Lewis geared that book towards. And I would say The Libertarian Mind is the exact same thing. I would recommend it to mostly people that are not libertarians and wondering why we believe what we believe. I think this is the best laid out book that I've ever seen as far as making it understood why I think we take for granted, especially as libertarians already, when we say, well, let's get rid of the Department of Education, of course. I noticed that he does not even say that for the first 3/4 of the book. Like, he doesn't give any recommendations. He tells you where we're coming from and why we're believing it. Mm-hmm. So then when he does say, this is why we want to get rid of the Department of Education, this is why we want to downsize welfare, this is why we have a problem with the Patriot Act, that's so far down the road. Like, he saves all those extreme, what I guess people consider extreme. Obviously, people in this chat, like you said, we take it for granted that it's not seen as extreme. And so for me, I thought that was an astounding job. I could not believe how well he he paces himself so well so that of course we're waiting for him to jump the shark, be like, just go crazy, man, go crazy, rip him apart, and he's like, no, let's talk about this from the point of view of somebody who's not a libertarian yet. And I think it really rationalizes it, and that's kind of what I liked about it. Paul, do you have any thoughts on anything we've said so far?
Yeah, I do. The way that you've described how he's structured everything, I think is a very important lesson for us when it comes to messaging. Like, we need to be seen as reasonable before we can start, I don't want to say attacking, but start giving policy prescriptions that the average person are going to find absolutely insane without them first being clued in on why this is a reasonable extrapolation of what we believe.
Yeah, I agree. I think you brought up the Department of Education, Hody. I mean, yeah, try to win over hearts and minds of teachers if you just go to them and say, we need to get rid of public schools in the Department of Education.
Yeah.
Automatically, they're not going to listen to you because this is my livelihood. This is what I do. I have a passion for this. Mm-hmm. You can't just, I guess it's the same, verbally vomit all over them, and it's just going to turn them off right away. So kind of this primer of the libertarian mind is it really draws you in from the beginning and as you go along, and everything is that you had mentioned already.
Yeah. I think we talked about this with, I know we've talked about with teaching before, but also like privatizing the police force. I think police oftentimes don't understand that this is actually in their benefit. They're in less hostile situations. They actually increase their pay. They're actually getting crimes that have victims as opposed to wasting time doing quotas. But you have to paint that picture for them before you just say, okay, first things first, let's shut down your police department. Let's get you out of a job. Like, you can't start there, like you said. It's just, and so I think he does a good job of laying out that promised land first, and then saying, okay, now let's talk about why we should leave where you're at. He builds the new house, which is better, before asking you to leave your old house, which is worse, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's, I think we should all go around. I think it would be fun to just talk about just an issue that the book brought up for you, something interesting that you would like to see everybody discuss. Let's start with Jacob this time.
You put me on the spot.
Yeah, dog.
I didn't really have anything per se really set out the book as being egregious or anything. I should probably clarify from the beginning. We've had discussion, outside of these conversations before.
Yeah.
I'm coming from libertarianism as a curiosity type thing, like really politically homeless. So a lot of these concepts are kind of new to me. But I think maybe Hadley's the one who brought it up earlier. It's kind of like when you're reading them, they seem like common sense as you go along. It's just I just need to flesh out in my mind a little bit more on how the stuff works and like actually executing them. I think the end, when it hit a little close to home, that we can discuss a little bit more, was they started talking about the role of like the military and all that stuff. And, which is what brought me to libertarianism was, Ron Paul circa 2012 talking about his view of what the military should be doing. And I just, couldn't agree more, which is, fast forward to now, that's why I'm here, But yeah, I thought I'm always interested in those questions and, especially when you're talking about too, but the police force, but, the police, the military, like the libertarian approach to how they do, military operations. And, my personal belief has always been, like focus on the defense first, and like, we don't need to be, I don't even know how many bases anymore, just a ridiculous amount all over the world, let's, do what we can to make something that's ready for defense. But to say we're overreaching right now is kind of an overstatement, but I thought that book kind of had a good discussion on that. I think it was way towards the end, though, maybe the latter part of the book. But I guess that's mine for the conversation purposes.
Yeah, I know the exact part you're talking about, and yeah, I think that was very close to the end, because I remember it was probably 95% of the way through the book, because he kind of leaves the door open for like anarchists a little bit, because he's like, we believe if the government is supposed to do anything, it's defense, if that, and so like kind of gives that voluntary angle, like, and then maybe he said maybe when we get there we start discussing maybe looking at the military and seeing what we could do as far as making that voluntary as well. It's hard to disagree with anything he says. It's funny because it's written by a guy from the Cato Institute, and anytime I see anything from the Cato Institute, I think like stats until your mind explodes. Like, that is what the Cato Institute is to me. I love that they equip me with like so many statistics. A lot of times when I do a podcast, I go to the Cato Institute first because they can give me statistics for days. But it's way too heady for most people. They have a tough time reading all the graphs. They have a tough time reading all the charts. So it's funny that this book would come from him from a very non-statistical perspective. I listened to him do an interview, like an hour-long interview with Nick Gillespie about it, and just say, I wanted to change. There's Jonathan Haidt, who really does talk about like the libertarian mind, like literally psychology. He analyzes the difference between libertarians and conservatives and liberals, but he wanted to make this more like generally where we're coming from as opposed to the specifics. And I think what you said about the military, or what you're bringing up with the military, what the book brought up with the military, is really spot on, that you really want it to be rare. You really want it to focus on defense. You really want to get out of the intervention. I think he brings up a lot of not just examples, but I think even just setting up in your mind, even if you're not like a master historian, you see why these interventions don't work out. I think before he even goes into the specifics about historically why we could understand that Iraq and Afghanistan were going to be quagmires even before we got involved, he kind of paints that picture in your mind, says, this is why you should understand, this is why they're destined to be quagmires, because there's not these clear goals, they're not defensively focused, and when you start asking a Department of Defense to do things that aren't defensive, that the goals just aren't going to be clear enough. And without a clear goal, then there's no purpose, and then you get slogged in it, and then it's taken advantage of by special interests and politicians, and you can see their incentives to get involved into it more. And I think it's just a very good ABC building block. As I hop back onto the taken for granted thing, but I think it's just so easy because of, and I'll admit, I am, most of the people that follow me on Facebook follow me because I'm a libertarian. So it gets a little echo chambery, and it's just easy to throw out there, like, obviously Iraq was a mistake, when I forget that there's probably like a good 40% of the country that rejects that Iraq was a mistake. And I think he does a good job. Like, this is the book that I would recommend to them, especially that last, I think it might have even been the second to last chapter where he talks about the defense and what we're doing overseas. And I would just really recommend that chapter for anybody who says, well, I don't see these foreign interventions as a mistake or a problem. I would love to just have that on hand and just say, read this real quick and tell me what you think, and tell me where he's gone wrong, because it seems like history has kind of proved his point. But yeah, Paul or Hadley, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'm in business, and we're in the transportation realm, so we deal with a lot of regulations. And I guess part of it as a business owner, you're talking about the military, where there's no goal, there's no focus. Why are we going here? What are we doing? If there's no clear objectives, how are you ever going to succeed? You're not. You're just going to go in and you're going to get lost. Where a lot of times, if you're in business, if you don't have a clear business plan, clear objectives of what you want, even if it's launching a new product or starting a business, whatever it is, if you do that, you're going out of business if you don't have clear set goals of what you want to do. And then one of the things that kind of hit me was, I think try to highlight some things here on page 367. He talked about how every year Congress passes hundreds of new laws and regulations, print 80,000 pages of new regulations in the Federal Register. Lawyers agree that no business can possibly be in full compliance with federal regulations. We're looking to outsource HR to another company just so that we can make sure we are up to compliance on everything that's going on. But also, we deal with stuff from the Department of Transportation. And, this is an area where I struggle a little bit, is I see that certain regulations, I believe, have been helpful to keep bad operators not operating. There are people that will start up a business in the motor coach industry and run buses and just do things so poorly, and then potentially people get killed. But that's neither here nor there. I guess the one part going back to is FMCSCA is mandating, they'll mandate certain things, and then they don't give clear instructions, clear goals as to what this means. Like e-logs we've been dealing with for a while. That's been delayed, I think, 3 or 4 times. At first it was like 2016, 2015, everybody had e-logs. Well, they didn't tell all the manufacturers exactly what they meant by what's an e-log and what's not an e-log, and I won't go down that rabbit hole. But then now there's new stuff coming out that we need to have certain training programs in place by 2020. Okay, it's February 24th, 2019. There are no guidelines yet as to exactly what we need to have in place by 2020 for training programs. Now, I'm guessing we go above and beyond. I think we do a great job, and we're probably covered, but how are you going to mandate these things if you don't give people clear objectives? And I guess that kind of comes full circle. It just seems like that the government just never has clear objectives, and they're kind of willy-nilly, okay, let's go out here and do this now.
Yeah. Okay. So you brought up the how we keep bad actors out of it. That's probably a great conversation for us to have regarding this book that I'm sure all of us are chomping at the bit to answer here. Let's finish Jacob's thing, and then we'll move on to that, because I think that could be really interesting. But Paul, did you have anything you wanted to add about military objectives?
No, not really.
All right. Jacob, did you want to add something that we didn't cover, because you have the most experience in that regard?
Yeah, I won't say too terribly much because I do work for them, right? But no, I will say that I've had discussion before about where I stand on libertarianism, and I think you talked about it too, to plug your conversation with Arvin Bora about having some commonalities with some people that could help out the party and the movement. That's kind of where I'm at right now, is that I believe on a previous discussion we had where, the ultimate end state of libertarianism, I'm not, the whole, like, I guess the extreme version would be like the NCAP version, right? Like, I'm not 100% sold on that yet, but I feel like the direction they're headed is my same direction. I just might get off the bus sooner, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. But nobody else is going that route at this point, in terms of trying to get us out of these quagmires, as you put it, overseas and all that. But, yeah, no, other than that, a lot of good points were brought up. I'm definitely interested in the regulations discussion that was brought up earlier. One final plug just on a previous episode. If I'm not mistaken, there was a WAL Daily a while back about hazmat regulation and the effects that would have on, like, the private versus the government.
On the environment?
Maybe it was the environment. I could have sworn there was one that was about hazardous materials brought up. Anyway, I was just trying to plug a WAL Daily. I can't think of which one it was specifically, but it might have been a couple months ago. But
you could be talking about the one Paul and I did, the environmental one, who will speak for the trees.
Right, and was talking about, like, the regulations that are imposed by the government, and could the privatization of it be better? It might have been that one. I might just get my conversations mixed up, but yeah, I think there's some overlap in that conversation too.
Sure. Well, let's go ahead and dive into what Hadley talked about. Hadley, I don't know if you meant to make this like what you wanted to talk about, but we're talking about it because it's a big old can of worms with regulation, because I totally understand what you're talking about. This is one, Paul, I know you can contribute on, as far as
I thought about him right when I was saying that.
Yeah. As far as regulations, why should people trust an unrestrained market as far as with their own, to regulate itself?
So one of the things with an unrestrained free market is you also don't have restraints on the liability that can be put against you. A bad actor who, through negligence or purposeful cutting corners is going to face penalties so severe that it's going to cripple their ability to do business in the future. And yeah, there are still going to be people that are going to cut corners in such a regime, but we still have those people operating today with highly restrictive systems in place. So I'm thinking that there's an element of human nature there that you're never going to conquer with regulation, that it ultimately just makes everything more difficult for the people that do want to operate above board.
I think it's a totally valid worry, Hadley, and I don't ever want to dismiss it because I was reading this book called Thanks 1,000, and it's a great book. It's just about being grateful. It was a self-help book. I was reading it as part of the Boss Hog of Liberty, Dakota Davis's book club, and it's great. It's just about being grateful. But he was talking about coffee beans, and he wanted to thank everybody that was responsible for his cup of coffee, and how to thank them all like went off the rails. Like there's so many people. If you've heard like Milton Friedman talking about like the pencil and how many things that actually go into the pencil and how many different nations they're from and the beauty of capitalism, how it brings it all together. It was very similar to that. Now the guy is not, it's not at all a political book, but it makes you think of that when you see how many people he has to thank for his coffee. And he was talking about how before the department, before there was inspections and regulations on coffee, the things that people would use as coffee substitutes, and they were gross. I mean, everything from like insect fecal matter being in there to beans that weren't even coffee beans, to these weird, roast, to just all these foreign substances that weren't any good. And so I think it's important that when people talk about their worries about getting rid of just regulatory activity entirely, that we had an era like that and it was not good, where people were selling gross things in coffee. Now, a lot of that was very unaccountable medieval merchants. We got to go back kind of a ways, because in our modern era, we've developed a system to say, if you did not sell me what you said you sold me, or the thing you sold me did something that it was not supposed to do to me, then you're in some trouble. If I make somebody sick with my cup of coffee, even without a regulatory agency to make sure I don't get sick, I can take action against you because you said it would do this, and great feels and great vibes, and then it ended up doing something else, which was make me sick because you replaced it with insect turds. And so there's also a quality. I think there's a natural quality monitor on the market, because what you say is this coffee is garbage and this coffee is great, and I'm going to go to the place that's great. I don't need somebody to tell me I'm not allowed to go to the place that's bad, because I just don't want to go there because the coffee's kind of bad. And I think that's how most libertarians would probably go about it. I again still wouldn't dismiss the idea of regulation entirely. There's and I can't remember the guy, but there's a liberty-based guy who talks about living in an era post-regulation and how it might seem scary, but people would actually voluntarily regulate themselves because it's transferring your liability. If you have somebody else say, yes, their coffee beans are 100% pure, I can put that on my bag of coffee and say, okay, my bag's 100% pure, so says these guys. Then if they lied, or if I bought them out, there's there's actually two companies that are liable to get sued for it, and not just one. So it's actually, the market might actually provide an additional layer of protection for itself. Paul, when you and I were talking about the Energy Star stamp, they actually found out that most of those Energy Star products were not more energy efficient than the ones without the stamp on them. It's just the ones couldn't afford to bribe the department enough to get the Energy Star sticker, but they were still just as good.
Right. Well, I mean, look at what legally we're allowed to do to our food and still claim that it's 100% whatever. Mm-hmm. yeah, you can have 100% USDA grade A beef, and they pump it full of saline solution to make it look bigger and to bring up the weight a little bit, because, water is in beef, and, that's still part of the beef. This is a, grade A chicken breast, but it's been basically enhanced in one way or another through the addition of water.
Right. You're speaking right in my alley. I used to be a kitchen manager I think I've been a kitchen manager between 2 different restaurants for like a total of 4 years of my life. And we had to watch those. One was a steakhouse, and one of them we had to watch that saline solution. We would change suppliers sometimes. And we'd have to watch that like crazy, because saline on a grill, the water just falls right out and it'll flare up and it's awful. So it's I know what you're talking about. I think the issue, Hadley, for me, it comes down to, okay, there might be some problems with regulation, like you mentioned, the cabbies and drivers and things like that. But I think when there's a free market regulation, the incentive is to help the consumer, because that's who's paying the bills. Whereas when you have a government regulation, the incentive is to help the government, because that's who's paying the bills. And it's kind of played out that way. Jacob, did you want to add anything to that? But I do want, obviously, Hadley, will end with you and see how you feel about all this. But Jacob, did you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I thought of when you guys were talking about the whole meat issue was, even like, the government in terms of blessing off on certain foods. I just read today is coming up right now. Did you guys hear about the pink slime being approved to be called ground beef? Did you guys hear about that?
No.
It's a whole thing that just came out like today. I have a good friend of mine that one of those people that whenever she posts one on Facebook, like 99% of the time it's right, like somebody I trust. And she had posted something about that today, and something I'm gonna look into. But yeah, I was just like, hey, like, this like pink slime like byproduct is now being allowed to be called a certain type of ground beef, and it's gonna be like blessed off on. It's just kind of one of those weird like the government's like, yeah, sure, why not? That's ground beef,
That's actually from the USDA. I'm looking at it right now. That's crazy.
You found it right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just blows my mind. So, people talk about, like, well, what's going to replace the government? It's like, well, like, technically, like, the government isn't even doing, like, what it said it's supposed to do right now anyways. So, like, even replacing it with nothing at this point is better than, like, I'd rather nothing than a lie, Like, anyway,
right.
But I thought that was an interesting story and kind of a sidebar to what we are discussing specifically about, regulations and meat and all that.
Yeah, I think that comes right back to our system isn't full capitalism anymore. It's a lot of crony capitalism. So you'll have people that were a part of a large corporation pushing subpar food, and then they end up becoming on the USDA board somehow after they allegedly are no longer with said company. And then they help put regulations to allow these certain huge companies push certain pink slime as ground beef, and then they end up leaving the USDA after their time is done there, and then they go back to the same company again later on and get a 3-time raise. So I think a lot of it comes back to, and Gary obviously is one of the people that first piqued my interest. He talked about a lot was that, we're not in capitalist, people talk about capitalism as an evil. It's like, no, the problem is we're in crony capitalism. So the people that are currently the ones that can pay off the politicians are the ones that are getting regulations built for them. And I guess you were talking about some of the private testing. I guess some of it could come back to like there's certain vitamin companies that'll get private labs to give them a seal of, no, I don't know. I think certain ones, I'm just thinking of like Advocare was a company that they had, a certain company would stamp it and say, if you're a professional athlete or an NCAA athlete, these are all cleared. And they basically would stand by that they'd be liable, that if their stuff comes back not clean, then they'd be liable for whatever the damages would be. So I can see that part of it. And on the regulation part, I definitely think in the bus industry specifically, there's definitely a huge cleanup that could happen. I mean, certain things, we get our buses are inspected twice a year, every 6 months. Okay, well, our buses pass 100% of the time. So why are we wasting the state and federal tax dollars on a company that's doing it right? Why not test them every year or every year and a half or every 2 years? If somehow there's certain tiers, but they just, I think they get so bogged down. And I think that there's another part, and I'm spitballing around here a little bit, that they talked about how there's all these regulations and things that have been put in place that you just don't even, actually, I'm sorry, maybe you were talking about it on one of the podcasts, Hody, but I think Chris was, national emergencies that were put in place. And there's all these things that get put in place and they just get forgot about. And then you just keep creating more and more regulations on top of that. Nobody ever goes back and says, do we really need this anymore? Can we change it? Oh, this is, put in place in the 60s. Why are we still going by that in 2019?
Sure. I think that was the Jones Act one.
Might have been.
Yeah. Well, Hadley, I didn't want to delete your question. Did you have any? It was just something you brought up that I thought was interesting, the regulations. But I didn't want to delete your opportunity. Was there a topic about the book that you wanted to bring up?
No, I just really like that how he laid it out. That, I mean, basically, it's just showing that it should be up to the state or whoever to prove as to why they need to enforce certain things, and not, so it's the exercise of power, not the exercise of freedom, that requires justification.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's just, you justify why you should be free. They just will change it, and it's the exercise of power that doesn't require the justification. It's the reason of freedom that needs the justification. So I thought that was very good, and I think that was right on page 1, probably in the first paragraph or two. So he kind of nailed it home there. But nothing else really that stuck out above and beyond just the whole book and the bring me into the fold.
That's cool. Yeah, you know what? You definitely brought up something wave thought-provoking, though. I think it was Donald Trump just recently, and I rag on the guy a lot, but he brought out all of the Did you see that he printed out all the regulations that we have for the Department of Labor? And it is stacks of papers that are as tall as him. I think there was like 4 of them. And he was looking at it, and he covered them up with some red tape and was just said, we need to get this limited down. I quote this a lot on the episodes, and I don't know how long ago this was, but the Department of Labor mentioned 2 statistics. One is that every business I think every person commits 3 felonies a day that they don't know about. And that's felonies. That's not crimes. That's your average person probably commits 3 felonies based on these regulations they don't know about. And the second was that, they said every business, no matter how small, should have at least one 40-hour full-time lawyer dedicated to regulation compliance. That's a recommendation, but that's what they say is necessary to have to fit with all this compliance anymore. And that, to me, is bananas. And you look at how corporate that is and how much that helps the big businesses and really squishes small businesses to just say you can't possibly know enough. You can't even know all the hoops to jump through. I mean, no lawyer has gone through all of those pages, has read it. I mean, It's sad when you have to measure it in feet instead of pages, but no lawyer has actually gone through, whatever it was, 100 feet worth of pages of regulations and knows them all, but they know enough. And you need at least one of those full time to go on. It's just it's nutty, and I think it was it wasn't Joy Behar. It was somebody who responded on Twitter and was like, every single one of those regulations is there to keep our water supply safe and to keep our air clean. And people dumped on her, and I'm glad it happened. But they were like, well, this one says I'm not allowed to build a boat. This one says I can't make wood unless it's cut with a saw that is X long, and they're ridiculous. They're out of control, and they're there to be ridiculous so that any big business can put any small business out like that and just say, oh, you're trying to compete with us. Well, We are able to afford that big chainsaw that's required to saw all the wood with, and you can't. Okay, so let's talk about the topic I wanted to bring up, because I love talking about things that I love to talk about. I listened to that interview he did outside of the show, and I thought it was fascinating. He brought it up this way, and because they were talking about how he spends a lot of time in the economy first and talks about the social stuff on the second half of the book. And they asked if that was just because he wrote the Libertarian primer first. And so they said, is that why that you just kind of decided to add social issues later? He said, no, he actually added some of the more economics at the beginning and more social stuff at the end. But he said that the order it tends to go in countries is they gain economic prosperity and then they start to demand political freedom. And that was the order that he saw things going in countries worldwide. It made me think. He brought up a couple of examples, but didn't go into detail in the interview. But it made me understand the Cato Institute a little bit more, because they do deal with mostly economic issues. They deal with some social issues. I don't want to completely club them, but they deal with a lot of economic issues. And it kind of made me understand more about them, because I oftentimes wonder, it's like, why don't they spend as much time on social issues like the drug war and gay marriage? Those things seem so important and so thought-provoking. And in his mind, the reason is because we need to get people economically free, and then they will develop a sense of social and political freedom after that. So I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. He really just kind of glossed over it, but I just wanted to see what you guys thought of that. If that's, I think I catch myself going on social issues because they just seem so hot. But if we actually push for real economic reform, if that would actually help us more with social reform, then whoever wants to answer that first. Yeah, it's that much of a thinker.
I'll have something in 5 seconds, maybe.
Okay. All right. I'll give you a chance to think about it. You know what? I guess I'll just give you my thoughts first, because that'll help y'all catch up in a little bit. I don't know. I haven't thought it through. I actually just listened to that interview today because I knew we were going to be discussing the book. And I was like, let me keep this fresh in my mind. I remembered the book well enough, but I just kind of wanted to meet the author a little bit. It made me understand the Cato Institute, like I already discussed. But I don't know. The thing is I see such successes when we do attack the drug war, and that it looks like, drugs are winning the war on drugs is the joke, but it does look like, because of the social push, that we actually are gaining some social freedoms there. Meanwhile, we are every day losing more and more of our economic freedoms. I don't know that he was saying it as 100% rule. In fact, he was going back and talking about how usually when a person makes about between $2,000 and $6,000, I guess this is political scientists have discovered this, is what he said. When people are making between $2,000 and $6,000 a year, that's when they usually start talking about political freedom. Obviously, we make way more than that here in the United States, so we're not dealing with, we need to start talking about our social freedoms. We have a lot of them. I haven't done enough research to say, but if we were only making $6,000, we'd stop worrying about drug issues. We'd stop worrying about social issues. I can kind of see that, because if you're only making $6,000 a year that's yours to actually spend on things that you like, social issues probably do take a back seat, because it's so pressed. I don't know that the rule plays out as soon as, I think as soon as you're making over 30,000, 40, 50, 60,000, whatever the dollar amount per household tends to be, I think it probably is a little looser as far as when we start demanding more political and social freedoms. But I can absolutely see that if a country is experiencing a good amount of economic slavery, America has a lot, but we're nowhere close to, say, a Zimbabwe, South Africa, Afghanistan, a lot of those that are Venezuela, a lot of those that are economically enslaved. Social issues have kind of taken a back seat down there. You don't, at least the news from them isn't, hey, our gays aren't able to get married. It's, by the way, I don't have enough money to buy a cat to eat tonight. And that's kind of the premier issue. And I think that for me, it strikes me as true, at least to a certain point, when we're talking early. If we're talking about like foreign countries, I wouldn't necessarily use it as a rule of thumb here in the United States, just because we do have more economic freedom in those countries. It is getting less free, which is concerning that eventually it'll hit a point where we stop crying for social freedom. But I think that point is still a ways off yet.
It does make sense to me because if you look at the classic hierarchy of needs structure, political freedom is going to be much lower on the hierarchy than just being able to eat. Once you've seen to your needs of immediate shelter, immediate food and sustenance, then yeah, you have time and you have the energy to start putting towards the higher level self-actualization and political self-realization.
Yeah, and I think humans in general are caring individuals. So once we've gotten to a point of, okay, I can feed my family and put a roof over their head, that's where we can start thinking more about everybody else, and maybe those that aren't what we believe aren't as good of position as we are. That's why, you see the United States gives so much in charities every year, and that was another note that I had, that with certain taxes and stuff like that, how much more would Americans give if there was a free economy to the different charities. But that's kind of all I got to say there. Kind of a topic that I haven't really thought much on.
Jacob, I think we bought you 5 seconds.
I know, right? If I don't have anything good now, I have no excuse, No, so whenever I talk to anybody specifically about libertarian ideas, I never refer to it as that. I kind of just, see where they're coming from first and kind of go with the flow with that. My biggest one has always been economic, just for the sheer fact that, I always kind of beat on the drum that we are spending way more money, than as a country than, what we need to be for anything really. We always talk about, we as a nation talk about, huge deficit, I guess we'll have to raise some taxes. It's or we could spend less,
Yeah.
Crazy thought, we can go the other way. And that's kind of how, again, going back to, people being, allies of the Libertarian Party, it's kind of like we as a country are overweight, and we got to go on a diet, and the Republicans and Democrats are, no, we can get healthy by just, continuing the fast food lifestyle. And, regardless of how you want to lose that weight, I think if you want to go down that path, then, hey, you're on my team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're going to beat that drum of let's, in this metaphor, let's lose weight, then I'm cool with that. In this situation, the ANCAPs are the strict ketos. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're no, you must be strict keto. And then, I'm probably more classical liberalism. So maybe in this, I'm the dirty keto of the group, the strict ketos hate me, but the other ones that are just, counting calories all still like me. So I'm somewhere in the middle,
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, hey, I want to lose weight. You know what I mean? I want to lessen how much money we're spending overall. And I think that's usually the easy button answer on talking to other people is the average person will agree that we're, spending money very wastefully. And that's your foot in the door to start down the rabbit hole of economics, that's step one. Step two is what do we do about it? And then around step 3, 4, or 5, now you've introduced the term libertarianism,
Yeah, totally. I love that analogy, the weight analogy, by the way. I think that's awesome, because it's so true that it's sad when you see economists, whether it's Krugman or Krugman or Sowell, or no matter how libertarian or how liberal or how conservative, all of them talk about our economy well, we know we got to get our spending under control at some point. And if we don't, we're going to collapse. The whole only reason that countries even continue to buy our debt or that people continue to buy our bonds is because they know that we can diet if we have to. They're waiting for us. I mean, it's almost like 600-pound life. Like we know you haven't hit that threshold where you are going to die yet, but you're getting there, but eventually at some point you're going to require some major surgery. You're going to have to do some major setbacks and it's going to hurt. And the longer you put it off, the more it's going to hurt later. I think that's right on point with the economic discussion that he talks about by saying that we can, not that he says we should kick social issues down the road. The book doesn't say that at all. But I think just from his perspective is saying every day you kick economy down the road, it's going to be harder later. Whereas there's actually some social issues that might actually be easier later. But this economic issue is not going away right now. You're going to be in trouble and in some pain the longer we keep waiting. I think that's an excellent point. Hadley, you talked about charity. I love how he just talks about in the book, he briefly mentions this, but talks about the immediate gratification of charity, that we want to see someone be healed. One of the reasons that we love TV where they build like a house for somebody, or we love those viral videos where you see a homeless guy get $100 and buy himself, a coat, or coats for his friends or something, is because there's that gratification. You actually see the people you help. Right now it's all numbers. So when I tell you that, I guess they did an audit, 20% of our food stamps are fraud or something, and they go to nothing, and we misplaced, I think over 10% of the money that goes towards welfare just is misplaced and completely unaccounted for. It's just a number, and we never see the people we help anyway, so nobody cares. Whereas I think there would be so much more accountability. I mean, this is Bose's assertion as well as I think, but I think the assertion that if we just got to see these people and just say, here's the life you're helping, it goes from you to them, people would be so much more apt to give to these charities. There's even bad charities now that because of regulation, the government will support that don't actually do a lot of charity. The government will keep them afloat because they give them a certain cut of it. So it's funny because I just think that in a market economy, you would demand, you don't go to McDonald's and say, here's $1, I want my McDouble. And then McDonald's gives you half a McDouble. And they're like, yeah, we just kind of misplaced the other half. That's not the way it works. You demand the whole thing. So when I give money to a certain person, I need to see that whole thing get there. That's what the economy demands if it's direct. When you put these middlemen in between, and the government creates a lot of them, you just kind of lose track because you say, I don't know where my $100 is anymore. I put it into the system. I don't know where it went. I don't know who it helped anymore because I can't see it anymore. And I think that would create so many more accountable charities. I agree with Bose on that point. Yeah, I don't know, does anybody, before we move on to talking about how excited we are for the next book, did anybody have any final thoughts about the Libertarian Mind or anything we didn't get around to discussing that you really wanted to talk about? Sounds
Paul?
like yeah, Paul?
Paul, you got anything from the book?
I really liked the title.
Me too, buddy. Me too. So yeah, Hadley, I think you said it was 5 stars. I think that this is just one of those, it's a book that I will, and I think maybe those of us well-versed in libertarianism, I think it's cool that we have some new folks that actually read the book, and I think it's really cool that you guys are in the book club and participating. I really appreciate that too, by the way. But that, like, you got so much out of it, because I think it would have helped me more had I started with a book like this when I was getting introduced to libertarianism. Because I think it creates a demagogue when you say the government's bad no matter what, and this is bad no matter what, and war and Iraq is bad, and drugs are bad, and or drugs are good, or you end up developing. I think the problem we have a lot of in the libertarian party especially, but in libertarianism in general, is that we evolve it around this set of ideals as opposed to the mind. And the mind is so much more important than the set of ideals. There are libertarians that are pro-choice and pro-life. I'm okay with both of them when they come from that libertarian mindset, because I understand what their protection is. If this person takes power, I understand their goal in being pro-life is not to govern women's bodies. Their goal is to not have the government sanctify killing people. But I also understand the pro-choice and saying that we understand this is a difficult decision. I want autonomy for women. I want autonomy for people, and there's too much regulation required to make sure that you have a healthy baby, and that would end up turning into a tough society. So I think it's easy to turn something around an issue, especially something as hot as abortion. And I think this is the type of book that makes me say, okay, it's not about, let's back off the issues real quick, and let's just talk about what generally we're going for. Because I think when we just talk about, I want to talk about what generally increases more freedom, we can have an honest debate about something as hostile as abortion, or how we fund the Department of Defense, or something that becomes a hot topic, but it becomes less of a bigoted demagogue discussion when I come from it as a, hey, you and me are both trying to increase liberty, right? Let's talk about how we most effectively do that. I think it just for me makes me feel so much, it would have made me feel so much better. I'm glad that I've read it now, because it is definitely going to help me talk to my non-libertarian friends. And it is a book I will absolutely recommend to somebody who's like, what is libertarianism all about? I would just be like, can you read one book for me? And if so, this is the book. And I just feel like it would completely turn them on to our ideas, because I think it's a long book. We've almost forgotten all about that. It's an easy read, but it's a long book. He really leaves no stone unturned when he's saying, here's some of the objections you might have. I think he gets a lot around to most all of those objectives. So anybody else final thoughts aside from that?
I'll double up on what you said. I think it is a great introductory book. I'm glad that I got the chance to read it, because it kind of really put a lot of things in spectrum of what I've been hearing for the past, reading a little bit or listening to WAL. But it really brings it all together and gives a pretty strong foundation of where you go from here. Okay, if somebody jumped right into, maybe from my understanding, like Mises, maybe it might be a little bit too far for you. And I think one of the things that I do like about Bose as well is he's talking about people are driven a lot by emotions and feelings. And I think a lot of times people might focus too much on the heady stuff, where you got to understand, if you start talking specifics that people have never heard before, sometimes they'll just tune out. Or if you can start talking to somebody at a emotional level and talking about liberty and freedom and what that really means, it's going to impact them more than if you just talk about how if we cut out this department, this is how we're going to save this money. Like, okay, that's great, but okay, what does that really mean? For them, the numbers are so inflated, trillions and trillions of dollars. It doesn't even make sense anymore, especially when there's people out there talking about modern money, modern monetary.
MMT, modern monetary theory. I got you.
Let's just keep spending it, because nobody will ever. I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole. But I think one of the things, and you guys have done a great job talking about it, and I know Paul's done a lot on the show, is if you want people to come to where you're at, you can't scare them off and yell at them. Jacob kind of mentioned, okay, he's part keto. So even if somebody's like pure carb diet and you're in keto, maybe you should talk to them, and then don't tell them that, oh, what's your problem? How could you just eat carbs? You're such an idiot. Well, okay, automatically you called the person an idiot, or why don't you get this? You're not going to bring them over to your side. But if you can get to them at an emotional level and talk to them about as to why the keto way is the right way, well, maybe they'll start listening. So it's my 2 cents.
That's great. think well, let's move on. Let's get an introduction to the next book here.
The next book is the Keto Cookbook, I'm sure, based on the conversation.
Yeah. The Ketotarian book. It's Liberty's First Crisis, and I got to be honest. Here's the thing: I know a lot about the Founding Fathers. I've read a lot about their biographies. I know nothing about the Alien Seditions Act, and I've read through the Philadelphia Convention numbers. I love pages and pages of those, and it took a while, but I love it all. And it's funny that I just feel like my knowledge of the Founding Fathers after 1780 is just gone. And so it's weird. It's going to be interesting for me to hear them talk about the first, like one of the first problems that comes up, right? And what to do with immigration. It's going to be relevant to the present time. I'm glad Chris selected it because obviously we're dealing with immigration today. But I think that that's maybe what I'm the most excited about to talk about in the book, because I have such a great background on the Founding Fathers and their biographies and their history and the type of people they were. And I have almost no knowledge of where those ideologies went after the founding of the country, pretty much. So I'm excited for that. How about you guys?
Yeah, I've started the book. I'm about, well, I don't know. Kindle says 9% in. I'm beating you again, but don't worry. You'll just spend 2 hours and finish the book off, and I'll be 2 weeks behind you.
Nice.
But it's like you said, you have 1776, those 5 or 10 years, and then it goes to like the Civil War, and then we learn about World War I, and then World War II, and then we forgot about Korea, and then you learn about Vietnam, and then you just kind of go through these things, and it's I guess a little bit, but it's amazing how almost some of the thoughts that these founding fathers had, like literally within the 15 years or so, it almost seemed like they were going to 180. And it's really, so far it's been very interesting, and like also the factions between the Federalists and the Republicans of that time. So I've started reading. It's a pretty quick read, although he's jumping around a little bit in time frames. It was kind of confusing to me, but otherwise it is pretty interesting because, like you said, Hody, you learn about the Revolutionary War and a few years after that, and it's kind of, there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
How do we get from 1776 to 1996 type of deal? But so I'm excited. I already like it.
Cool. Jacob and Paul.
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. Like I've said multiple times already, I'm definitely learning a lot about the libertarian movement overall. Like with the Libertarian Mind, I got a lot of the core concepts kind of fleshed out for the most part. Just need to work on how they apply. But it's good to see the libertarian principles actually being played out and fought for through real world examples back in the day that have already come and passed. Like you were saying about the Sedition Act and all that. I mean, the only thing I know about it is I had to read it once because there was some name recognition, but this was like an assignment in college that is long since forgotten. So I'm looking forward to reading up on it for sure.
So have you read this book already?
Oh God, no. I just literally had the most basic of I've heard about this before.
Oh, okay. The Alien Sedition Act. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm talking about just in general. I remember reading up on it, but not enough to have an actual conversation about. So I'm looking forward to going back and re-looking at that for sure.
Cool. How about you, Paul?
I look forward to showing up a month from now and having done none of the work but getting in on the grading for the group project. So
well, we'll take it, man. I appreciate your showing up anyway. Again with Christy Avery and Paul and not Paul, Chris out of commission today. It was nice to have an extra voice. So whether you read the book or not, or even read the title page or whatever you end up doing, I'm sure I'll be glad to have you. Hadley, I appreciate you holding me accountable. I need to get back to my only 3 hours on the Facebook. I don't know. It's so easy to let slip. Chris and I were both actually talking about this a week ago. I were just like, I don't know why. It's drugs. It's drugs. We do good for a month after reading this super important book talking about limiting your time, and then we just can't do it because we're addicted. It's crack. But I'm going to try to reaffirm myself to the 3 hour window on social media. And not even hold myself to the whole 3 hours, but just be allowed on social media for those 3 hours and just keep bettering myself during the rest of it. But yeah. All right. This was a fun book club. I appreciate you guys making the time and coming out and giving us your thoughts. If you're listening to this, that means you're a Patreon donor, and that means that we really appreciate you, and we're just so grateful that you keep this network going. If you want to join the book club or be a part of this conversation, there is no limit. You don't have to send a request or, Master, may I please join? Am I libertarian enough? We will welcome you if you are an anarchist or a Republican or a Democrat or a socialist, or if you just want to get in on the book club. We talk about self-help books. We read way more than just liberty books. And recommend some books for us to read from all kinds of different perspectives. We got them up on our bookshelf. It's just on Goodreads. It's the Weird Libertarians Book Club, so it's really easy to find. But please join us. We'd love to have you in on this conversation. It's been fun again, guys. Hadley, Paul, and Jacob, I look forward to talking to you next time.
Absolutely. See you next month.